Welcome Vintage Hollywood Archive. Some people kill themselves with drink, others with overdoses, some with a gun. A few hurt themselves in front of trains or autos. I hurled myself in front of another white man. Dorothy Dandridge recalls in her autobiography, Everything and Nothing. Why was Dorothy Dandridge's life a nightmare behind the scenes? Make sure to watch the video until the end, and if you are new here, don't forget to join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Vintage Hollywood Archive channel. Dorothy Dandridge was the first black woman on the cover of Life magazine and the first black woman nominated for the Best Actress Oscar. In her brief life, she accomplished much, yet she was always beset by tragedy. Everything and Nothing, the Dorothy Dandridge tragedy, released 5 years after her death, is an insightful, often humorous autobiography in which Dandridge and her co-writer Earl Conrad set out her search for love in a candid, often luscious style. Dandridge writes, "If it is possible for a human being to be like a haunted house, maybe that would be me." Dandridge's only child, Harold Suzanne Lynn Nicholas, was born in 1943 during her first marriage to dancing icon Harold Nicholas and was her greatest challenge. Lynn had serious intellectual disabilities, which Dandridge blamed on her delayed birth. Due to the rigid medical norms of the time, Dandridge was ultimately convinced by doctors to send Lynn to a caretaker. On the outside, I said to myself, "I've had it, I'll give her up." Inside, I never gave her up. It was myself that I began giving up. To fill the gap in her life, Dandridge pushed herself into destructive relationships, but also focused on her career as a singer and actor. In the process, she encountered various challenges due to her race. She writes, "Whites weren't quite ready for full acceptance even of me. Purportedly beautiful, passable, acceptable, talented, called by the critics every superlative in the lexicon employed for a talented and beautiful woman. She got help from pills to dull the pain. But the haunting never vanished until her death at the age of 42 from an accidental overdose in 1965. Why did she end up being so heartbroken? What exactly were those difficulties that made her call herself a haunted house? To get more detailed answers, keep watching this video. Dorothy Dandridge, who was born in Cleveland in 1922, had a crying childhood, as she put it. Dorothy's mother, Ruby, an actress, had left her father 5 months before she was born. She was now a single mother with 2 daughters, Dorothy and Dorothy's sister, Vivian, and she was attempting to make a living in show business. Ruby began pressuring Dorothy to perform with her sister as the Wonder Children when she was still a kid. Geneva Williams, a friend of hers, agreed to assist her in their training. Geneva was left in charge of Dorothy and Vivian while Ruby was preoccupied with her own profession, and this was when Geneva's dark side emerged. She had a terrible temper that she frequently vented on the girls. There were also the fact that the girls rarely went to school because of their hectic traveling schedules. It hadn't been a normal childhood, and it wasn't going to get any easier. Her mother had taken Dorothy and her sisters on the road as all-singing, all-dancing child stars by the time she was a teenager. They were booked into New York's Cotton Club after a few cameos in small projects. It wasn't just the start of Dorothy's major career, it also marked the start of the first of many terrible relationships, this one with Harold Nicholas, one half of the legendary Nicholas Brothers dancing team. Dorothy was 16 when she met and fell in love with teen dance sensation Harold Nicholas. Dorothy was in love with him, but she had to make a difficult choice. Fame and fortune were calling her name, and she had no choice but to answer. Dorothy said goodbye to Harold as the Dandridge sisters embarked on a long European tour. They were all in for a big surprise though. It turned out that leaving for a European tour right then and there wasn't exactly the best timing. During the Blitz in London, the Dandridge sisters were forced to take shelter with hundreds of strangers and endure horrific nights of noise and damage. They eventually cut the trip short and returned to the United States, reuniting the lovers Dorothy and Harold Nicholas. Dorothy was shining with confidence, ready to take her next steps with that combination of fame and young love. She began to distance herself from her sister in order to pursue film opportunities. Harold and she were married in 1942. It was a significant shift, but she was in for much more surprising twists and turns. Although Hollywood was creating few films with rewarding parts for black actors, there was a parallel film industry that existed. Much of it has been regrettably lost to time. These were films made for black viewers with black actors who were given credit for their work. Dandridge appeared in one, Four Shall Die, but unfortunately it was a flop. Meanwhile, Dorothy's marriage to Harold appeared to be a dream come true, but it was a nightmare behind the scenes. Harold began to treat Dorothy coldly soon after they married, and his gaze began to wander. Dorothy might have had the confidence to kick Nicholas out if he hadn't been her first love. Instead, she blamed herself for his mistreatment. She learned that she was pregnant early in 1943 and hoped it would save their marriage. Unfortunately, she was in for an immense shock. When Dorothy began to undergo labor pains at her sister-in-law's house, Harold was off with the car playing golf. Before going to the hospital, Dorothy insisted on waiting for him there. She eventually went on to give birth to a disabled daughter, Carolyn. Day after day, Dorothy endured humiliations. Some stemmed from her own home, such as her husband's womanizing, while others came from the industry she adored. Her struggle to break into mainstream Hollywood on her own terms stung, and she experienced horrendous discrimination. After Tarzan's peril, however, she quickly became a household name. It resulted in her being featured on the cover of Ebony magazine, which was a big achievement. Her star was finally rising to match her desire, but she was concealing a profound heartbreak. Harold had finally abandoned her and their child after years of misery and cheating. She eventually filed for divorce, which was finalized by the courts in 1951. After that, Dorothy got up, ready to start a new chapter. Carolyn Lynn had learning issues. Therefore, her mother looked after her as she started to succeed in Hollywood. Dorothy started collaborating with pianist Phil Moore. She revised her approach because the smaller roles she was gaining weren't cutting it. She took on a sultrier persona with the help of Phil Moore and arranged nightclub concerts that would earn her considerably more attention than any small role. It turned out to be a brilliant idea. Since its inception in 1941, the Macambo has been a Hollywood hotspot. And what better venue to attract Hollywood's elite? Dorothy debuted at the Nightclub in May 1951 after putting up an act with Phil Moore. She wore stunning dresses and charmed audiences with her every word during her nightclub performances. When the stage lights went off, however, what she often faced was both painful and unpleasant. Dorothy's performances were held in segregated venues. That means she couldn't speak to anyone in the audience or use any of the hotel's common areas, including the lobby, elevator, or bathrooms. While white celebrities had access to a lavish dressing area, Dorothy, the freaking show's star, had to make do with a storage closet. Her name was on the billboards, and the white audiences who saw her sing screamed for her, but the humiliations she had to endure backstage perplexed her and hurt her heart simultaneously. To cope with the grief, she followed in the footsteps of so many other artists and turned to medications and alcohol. Still, she was so focused on her career that she was able to keep it all under control. However, that wouldn't always be the case. Dorothy used more than a cocktail to heal her shattered heart. She had a soft place for an English accent from her World War II experience, and actor Peter Lawford had that, as well as charm to spare. When he attended her show at the New Frontier in Las Vegas in the early 1950s, the two quickly became romantically involved, but as you would expect, they had their challenges. The relationship quickly withered, and Dandridge began to believe that Lawford and his charm duped her. She knew that Lawford was ambitious and would never marry a black woman, so Dandridge had let herself fall hard. They broke things off, but still, she admits in her book, "If I were honest with myself, I would have to admit that I wanted nothing better than to hear him say, 'Marry me.'" Dandridge despised the vulnerability of working at nightclubs and was especially repulsed by ravenous men seeking her favors. Despite this, she couldn't say no to a paycheck or the opportunity to socialize. An anonymous flunky invited her to a party thrown by studio exec Harry Cohn after one of her shows one night. Dandridge was outraged to discover that the party wasn't really a party at all when she arrived. Instead, she was stuck in a hotel room with Cohn, a man known for his predatory conduct as well as his Hollywood credentials. He began to discuss how he might assist her in her profession. Dandridge stood up and left the room. It could have been the end of her career, but she was fortunate to have people to lean on. Dandridge met a new fan, blonde bombshell actress Marie Wilson, after yet another gig in Vegas. They became friends in a matter of minutes. Within a few minutes, Wilson was bringing a Life magazine journalist backstage to meet Dandridge, and the meeting helped feature her photo. Like Marilyn Monroe, her fellow student at the method-based Actors Laboratory, Dandridge was a believer in psychoanalysis who credited her doctors with saving her life on numerous occasions. She met a man who shared her interest in Freudian theories while performing in a concert with Desi Arnaz at La Vie en Rose in 1952. The two began a passionate relationship and discovered they had many common interests, including a fascination for psychotherapy. However, this love of psychotherapy harmed their relationship. Dandridge writes, "When the language of love merges with the argot of psychiatry, their romance was short-lived." They remained friends, however, and appeared in the films Bright Road, Carmen Jones, and Island in the Sun together. Dandridge secured a meeting with famed Austrian-born filmmaker Otto Preminger in 1954, excited about the prospect of playing the possibly career-making lead in the film Carmen Jones. This was the most desired starring role for a black woman ever designed by Hollywood. Dandridge, according to Preminger, was too sophisticated for the major character in his film. She proceeded to prove Preminger wrong. I hurried to Max Factor's studio and looked around for the right garb. I would return looking like Carmen herself. I found an old wig, which, I was told, Cornair Wilde wore in one of his pictures, she writes. I put on heavy lipstick and worked to spit curls around my face. I made myself look like a hussy. Finally, she went to the gym for a hardcore workout to achieve a tired look as if I had worn out of bed. Dandridge got the part, and it was a huge success when it came out, and when asked why people could only utter one name, one reason: Dorothy Dandridge. She was nominated for an Oscar for the part, but at the same time, Dandridge came to see the 4 years she spent with the dominating married Preminger as wasted time. He urged her to avoid supporting roles, including one in The King and I that would be performed by Rita Moreno. He forced her to concentrate on nightclub singing instead. Preminger was verbally abusing her in ways he typically reserved for inferior actors. The romance was ended by the time they shot 1959's iconic Porgy and Bess, co-starring Sidney Poitier. Clearly, having an affair with a married director was scandalous, but the worst was yet to come for Dandridge. The Confidential magazine ran an article about her when she was at the height of her fame. It reported an alleged 1950 encounter between her and a white band leader. Dandridge was enraged, and she had no intention of taking the despicable charge sitting down. She was involved in a historic lawsuit in 1957 when she sued Confidential and its parent company for libel. Her desire for vengeance didn't end there, even though she settled for $10,000. She also went against them in a criminal prosecution, describing how it would have been impossible for her to find a place to hide with a bandleader since segregation regulations prevented her from leaving her hotel room. Her testimony was essential in proving Confidential's libelous behavior. It may appear to be a minor victory, but it had a significant impact on the way Hollywood gossip magazines worked. Dorothy Dandridge won yet another award in 1957 when she returned to the film Island in the Sun after a 3-year break. It was a victory, but one that was restrained. After that, Dandridge's personal as well as professional life quickly worsened. A few failed films, some disastrous investments, an ugly breakup with Preminger and later marriage to white restaurateur Jack Dennison, who abused her and wasted her money, pushed her to drink. She had Lynn committed to a state hospital because she could no longer afford to keep her daughter in special care. She declared bankruptcy a few years later. She tried to get out of her financial bind by working in nightclubs all the time, but it was never enough. She was even more saddened when several of her friends advised her not to publish her memoir, claiming that her narrative was not a credit to her race. By 1965, she was exhausted, perplexed, and heartbroken. She was discovered dead on the bathroom floor in 1965, wearing a blue scarf around her head, and an autopsy confirmed she had died of antidepressant overdose. Some deep words in her autobiography summed it all up. All the rest is nothing, and all the rest has been nothing. The work was nothing, the applause was nothing, the fortune made, that was nothing, and who knows, perhaps in my fury I let it all go. Whatever the beautiful Dorothy Dandridge earned in life was truly nothing for everything she struggled with. She was not alone with miserable situations. Did you want to know how Joan Leslie was scammed and lost everything? Watch this video.